All right. All right.
Turn it over to our moderator here.
All right. Okay, how many saw the video? Everybody see the video? Okay. Did everybody read the text? Did you think it was quite different between the video and the text?
Yes.
It's like, they're almost like totally two sides of, which is kind of interesting because there were two sides they're talking about. The video was talking about the more of the political international relations part, and the text was more of the actual trade and everything, if I got that right. So, so basically, let's do our usual thing. Let's kind of go around the room and give me your initial thoughts on what you think of this. I'll start with
Yeah, I thought the article itself is good. It seems like there's two sides. One is political, and one is economic.
yeah.
So, I don't think the economic is going to go away. The political nationalism has kind of changed the political thing. But capital needs to expand. They're definitely going to have markets all over the world.
Yeah, you can't hold back on that. That's what you're saying. Okay, good point. Valerie, what are your thoughts?
I had thought about something that I did in there, and I came back right now, so just keep going.
Okay. Yeah.
I thought it was ironic that we began this whole thing with the discussion of global supply chains. Now we're talking about the end of globalization, which I just don't see it happening. I don't. I might see an end to the use of special trade districts, but I don't see international trade shutting down.
You can't pull that back.
Can't pull that back. And we're too dependent on the natural resources in some countries to end global trade.
So there's no turning back on that. Everybody's pretty much agreed on that. And it's not really better.
The whole thing frustrated me.
What way?
Well, like many of these discussions that we've had, it's like, let's just get the hell out. But then again, we need to stay in. And, we are community, even in this group, we're a community. And I think about the communities that I'm part of, especially as a pastor. And I've learned in my role as a pastor, to keep your friends close by, they help you. But you better keep your enemies closer. And it's frustrating. I mean, these groups are so frustrating.
It is.
It's just, oh.
But there's no, and it just goes to the territory, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
But we gotta be that global community. That's what we were part of. It is the global community.
Good point. Gene, what are your thoughts?
Well, Scott invited me here today.
Okay.
I've only seen the video,
Okay.
and I found the video to be pretty much a reinforcement of what I thought, and it's another reason to pull out my what's left of this ongoing yo-yo with being a part of things. And no, we don't want to be a part. Yes, we do. And the reality that I thought the video, explained real well, that if we're not there, there's a vacuum, and somebody or something, especially that you really don't want, it's going to fill the vacuum. And what do you do? And when you put those two together, being a part makes, at least to my mind, more sense than not being a part.
That's it. Welcome, Gene, for backing that. Yeah, great thoughts.
As has been pointed out, the economies of the world are so interconnected and intertwined. It's impossible for those who really say buy American. You can't do it because everything is so intertwined. So just needs to be stayed with us.
Nancy.
Well, the reading was new to me because I've not been a aware, I'm not much aware of trading in all these different associations and different outcomes that are possible. I've never had an economics course, so it was interesting, a lot of acronyms.
Yeah. So what was that? Yeah. And you'll keep on going, hey, what was that? Okay.
Okay.
You're passing on that? Okay.
Well,
Brenda?
I kind of echo what Nancy says, and it was like there were so many initials for different organizations. I kept having to refer back to whatever they were talking about. I just didn't get into this much of last week's. I really like last week's.
All right. What do you think, Tony?
Well, first of all, I think we've learned that if we bow out of anything, China takes over. And that is critical for the future of our country. So I strongly believe we need to really work with our allies and build a stronger globalization by trading more with them and sort of forcing China out. That's my,
Okay, so you say forcing China out.
yes, by bringing our manufacturing facilities here, like we did under previous administration, getting more trade with Mexico, Europe countries, and so forth. It's a real tragic thing that every time we neglect an opportunity, China.
Okay, let me go back to some of those thoughts. Larry, can you unmute? What are your thoughts, Larry? Can you unmute him?
Larry Mortzoff, can you unmute? There we go.
Okay, go ahead, Larry.
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't quite hear everyone's comments. I'll just the title of the article is "The End of Globalization" with a question mark, and I think the answer is a obvious no. It's not the end of globalization, but during the Trump years, it threw a lot of things behind, and we're in a situation we're trying to reestablish trust, and I think the globalization works quite well for those countries that have a comparative advantage in a certain sector of an economy.
Okay. Larry Orcutt, can you unmute? You want to comment?
Yeah, couldn't quite hear all the other comments like Larry Mortzoff, but a couple of things. We've had globalization for millennia. It depends on what your view of the globe, the rest of the world, from the Phoenicians to the Silk Road, on and on. And I don't think we're going to end globalization. Make one quick observation. If you have communism and socialism, you tend towards a centrally managed economy, which, because it doesn't have the efficiency of the free market, results in shortages. And now, to overcome shortages, as we've experienced recently, we're talking about more centrally managed economy. And I'm not sure that we're going around the circle in the right way. That's all.
Okay. All right, I'm going to ask some questions as related to DVD, as we decided it's kind of like just two different perspectives, which is kind of interesting. And we've already answered one question: can globalization endure? And I think you have no choice, just based on modern communications, transportation. And as Larry was just saying, we've had it for millennia. This is nothing really new. It's just become more enlarged, and it moves quicker because of mobility and communications, things like that. But what do you think about? Do you think that Trump's withdrawal from many of these international organizations? Do you think we lost a lot of world influence, or do you think it matters? What do you think?
We have to make a decision. Do we want to engage, or do we want to move towards isolation? And we have, Trump is pulling out of things. The Democrats generally go with engagement, treaties, all these these, the World Bank and this is like the global order that we set up after World War II. And, we're gonna abandon it. I think that now we got a question about Ukraine, is it in our vital interest to go in? These are basic questions.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? What do you think? How badly do you think it has affected us? Yeah.
We are still bending ties with Western Europe, where we did not engage the Chinese state. And we're looking at China as our next major competitor, then going back into isolationism is just simply wrong. It's short-sighted. It doesn't recognize the reality of the world in which we live.
Anything else? What do you think?
Well, and history really doesn't paint a pretty picture of what happens to us when we go into a mode of isolation. The picture's just not pretty, and history can repeat itself.
Okay. So we have to fight our way back out of isolation.
Mhm.
As we did. What any other thoughts on that? No idea. How badly you think we've been hurt internationally? And that's just not, and again, it comes to not just trade, but our standing in the world as far as world leadership. That's what I'm referring to. What do you think? Tony, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't like what Trump did by pulling out,
Mhm.
but I like the fact that he was bringing more back to the United States. That way it gives us more opportunities for jobs and so forth. And there's got to be somewhere in between even Biden.
Okay, one of the things I think you want to clarify is we talk about bringing factory jobs back. A lot of factories and a lot of jobs disappeared, not because they went overseas, but because of creative destruction.
What?
Creative destruction, technology changes. I lost my first business because of that. Okay, things change, technology. If you don't keep up, you're going to lose. So that's where a lot of it's gone. It's not necessarily that many jobs have been sent overseas. Let me ask this. So the idea, everybody's talking about the idea of obviously engagement, even as messy as it is better than not engagement. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Well, it depends on what your bottom line is. In other words, do you want to be, like a political realist? We don't go anywhere except unless it's in our vital national interest. Versus, we're going to help run the world. So if you can answer that question, the other thing is, if there's a vacuum, it'll be
filled pretty quickly.
Yeah,
I
I think
there's
that's
more competition than that.
that Asian. Remember that? What was that Asian thing called? But we got out of that. We started.
TTP.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Which I forgot what it stands for. No, that was the, what was the TTP? TP or TPP? TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, that's right.
Ask Larry if they can hear us, because I think maybe we need to speak up a little more.
You guys hear us okay? Okay, I don't know, Larry always hides, so I can't tell him. Okay, all right. So we're looking at that. There have been some complaints that for example, they mentioned in the video, the Human Rights Council being very biased against Israel. And I can't read my writing, so I can't go out of that. Make that comment. But that was one of the comments. But as we all said, it's better to be inside than outside. Let me ask you this. We've been talking about this for decades since it was actually established at the UN. And so many people say, well, it's a worthless organization. Is it a worthless organization?
No.
Why not?
What are you going to do if you didn't have it?
Okay, that kind of answers the question, doesn't it? Yeah. It's better than nothing is what we're saying. And that's kind of getting back to what you had mentioned too, Scott, the idea of it's messy, I don't want to be here, but we have no choice. You have to just go through the weeds and do the best you can, right? Okay. So we really have, and I guess that's what everybody else has said at this point, we really have had no choice to find some way to work together. it's just a messy process, just like democracy, it's a messy process, right? What other things jumped out at you in that reading the article, for example, which again is more economically based as opposed to the video? What are some things that hit you?
The great divergence idea.
I'm sorry?
The great divergence, I would like to know a little bit more about that. You know, there's a point in time when he talked about the undeveloped countries, how they kind of lost out.
Yeah, it's big separate. There's not much of a middle ground, is that what you're saying? And then as far as industrialized developed countries do the undeveloped, hence the rate diversion, right?
I mean, you gotta have globalization. You make it such a strong point. All these countries that opened up, prospered. I think that's all over. On the other hand, you know, if you have treaty or like NAFTA agreements, you can put stuff in there for labor and for environment. You know, it doesn't have to be just straight up, you know, capitalism. So and NAFTA, the Democratic Party tried, the left wing of the Democratic Party tried to get environmental and security, you know.
And I think too, since there are so many concerns about migration, everybody knows how to do that. The other policy was build up these other countries so people don't feel they have to leave.
Central America.
Well, not just that one.
Yeah. Well, Central America, a lot of people think it's strictly the crime and the violence, but that's only part of it. The other part of global climate change, crops, it's desolate. They can't grow crops. So.
Even the economic policy.
Yes.
Of course, there's a lot of corruption.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a lot of corruption in Africa.
Okay, so that's the other thing that's going to happen too with the migration. I already talked about it here. I think with globalization, it's migration. You're just seeing the tip of the iceberg when you talk about people moving because of climate, and that disrupts other things. It creates more. You got political problems because of that too. So this is the very beginning. It's going to be massive. People realize that. So.
I wonder if they take into consideration how costly it can become to make these disengaged changes.
You know, it doesn't seem like they do.
Yeah. You know, they don't take into consideration what future aspects this might cost, and that's what I get out of the article. That, you know, I don't think Brexit understood what it's going
They
to
just
cost.
they slid into that unexpected.
Yeah.
Like, oops.
So are we going to learn from that, or just continue to do that?
I don't know. Do we learn from that kind of thing? I think it's kind of like pay me now or pay me later, but more. Right? So it costs you more down the road unless you mitigate up front. And that's what everybody, and that's, we all kind of reluctant, not just in this country, but everywhere, we're reluctant to do that. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Pass on that.
Okay. So, I mean, the idea is that's a good point. So that's part of the part that makes it messy. We can't agree on simple things, let alone more that's long range thinking, isn't it? So is working in the globalization society or community, is everybody short-term thinkers? All countries?
I think most of us are, I can't see a link to move to the top. When she said, Nancy, when she said, you know, I don't really understand a lot of this, well, I'm with you on that. But, and I think that's where a vast majority are.
Oh, sure.
It's like follow the leader.
Yeah.
And the leader in this country is either Trump or same people, so.
Okay. All right. So, okay. So what about trade? You know, what's your thoughts? They talk about free trade in there. They talk about tariffs and so on. What are your thoughts on that? Advantages and disadvantages. You see everything be free traded?
Well, you know, they make I think about 90% of the economists said tariffs don't work.
Okay.
You know, I mean, they do have tariffs at small.
Okay, and they kind of mentioned that with the page 96, they talk about the core principles underlie the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Members are to extend national treatment to foreign traders, which means they have the same rights as nationals in domestic courts. In other words, we're looking at more equality among, which makes it more effective in working together, right? Right. Protection against imports should be provided only through tariffs, so that trade policies are transparent. I think that's the key. The word is transparency. Are you trying, and what they're trying to do is set a level playing field? Isn't that what would be more practical? What do you think?
Didn't they say the cap on tariffs was 15% in the World Trade Organization?
Yeah,
They have
I-
certain rules and stuff that you can't.
Yeah, I think it was. Yes, yes. 15% is being a tariff fee. That's correct. Yeah. Which is probably reasonable. I guess would depend on what it is.
I think it's, for most things, it's less than that.
Yeah, it is. So, and you also mentioned the idea, the outcome was that as of the implementation of the last Uruguay round, tariffs on manufactured goods averaged between 3% and 5%. So last year. In advanced countries compared to 45 to 50% after World War II. All right, so things are better than they were 75 years ago. Well, then the other things come up, right? Okay, so what are, when you talk about this whole thing, they have some good questions here at the end. Here we go. One of the questions here they have is, can any country afford to ignore the growing trends of globalization in favor of isolationist policies? I think we kind of answered that one. How can globalization be improved so that it can benefit more and more of the global populace? What has prevented this in the past? So what are your thoughts? How would you, I'll use my magic wand question. You can wave magic wand over the whole thing and make it perfect. Describe what it would look like. What would be a perfect globalization system? Use your imagination. What do you think? Anybody?
Globalized, but you have restraints. You know, that you're gonna, like I said before, you're gonna protect labor, you're gonna protect the environment. You can't do without globalization. We can, there's a lot of things we can do.
Okay. So a lot of these problems are actually pretty simple, but getting to a solution, getting people to work together, that's not the simple part. But what other things? Just use your imagination. What would make globalization really perfect? What would it make it work? What would make it work really well? What do you think?
Smooth distribution of seaways and everything else, getting goods to and from places. Places that have no resources or very poor, I think it would help to have no tariffs to them. Okay. So they are affordable, help other rich countries be able to do the things they can, but then to fish instead of doing them.
So it goes so far as to say that more countries that are really well off, how could they support these very undeveloped countries, which in the long term would benefit the rich countries if they could build them up? Is that what we're saying? Yeah. Whether that be through economic support, obviously, you mentioned through no tariffs, which again, most of them are very 3 to 4%. So that's maybe not such a big issue, but there's other things that can be done, right? So along that line, what would the more well-off countries, what would a program be that would help them, that help other countries? What do you think?
Providing them consultants, advisors.
Okay.
Putting in facilities that employ
Education.
education, most importantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, education.
But I think you always have to guard against indebtedness.
We can't hear you.
We can take a message.
Governments have to guard against indebtedness and exploitation, because that's always happened in the past.
Okay, that's a good point.
You know, the IMF and the World Bank and all that, that's the idea. Except what we did was we screwed it because these 4 countries borrowed money that couldn't pay back.
Right.
And then we forced austerity and everything on the countries. The people suffered. But it was it was the banks that wanted to get paid off.
Yeah, well, the banks, that's the nature of banks.
They're on top, yeah.
But not necessarily humanitarian. Right? Maybe that's the problem. I don't know. What are some other ideas? How would you smooth the thing out? How would you get, Scott, how would you get people to work together more closely?
We're doing a lot of that already. Okay. But we aren't, as always, doing it effectively based more on how we think about it without looking at what they, how they see it.
So we're looking only strictly from our viewpoint and not the, how do you think about this?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why things that are very basic. It's a good thing to have ordinances. I mean, that's what's going to keep us together, are those ordinances, and to respect those things.
Right.
Yeah.
So that
How
goes back.
they work together for the greater good of all humanity. You know, that it really does, at least in my narrow mind, come down to, constantly asking ourselves, at any sort of level, how I'm living, acting, and, we working together, promoting the greater good, for all.
But it comes back to basic human nature, doesn't it?
You always have to fight that.
Defensiveness, to protect my turf, to protect my future. I'm afraid to go ahead and release any of that to help you. But if you really want to help yourself, you need to help.
Yeah, you can't do it without risk. I mean, there always is risk.
There's risk on both sides.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and you need to understand that, but if I can work it out with you, then that expands my greater good community, and if we can work it out with someone else, then that expands the community. It never happens without risk, but you
On
try
either
to.
side, it doesn't have, what I mean is.
Yeah, for either
In either
side,
situation, because there's always risk.
yeah,
But because the way humans are hardwired not to think that way.
yeah,
That's it.
oh, yeah, we're hardwired to think for ourselves.
Survival. Answer.
No.
Anything else, Ken? Anybody? Okay, Larry Mortzoff, you have any comments?
It seems to be rather difficult to level out world trade to the extent that it helps a lot of countries. Certain countries just don't have many of the things that the rest of the world needs. So consequently, they don't have too much to offer to begin with. So I don't know what you would do in that particular situation. Those are generally the countries that get international foreign aid. And so it's a tough question.
Okay, so what you're saying is so many countries, we'll call them the poorer countries, don't have much to give, meaning we don't have much in the area of trade or what we can do. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, that's a good point. So what do you do in that case? Go back to what Tony has talked about before. You think? Help support them?
Help support them, provide advisors, education.
Okay. Does that help? I don't know. Larry, Orcutt, what do you think?
I'm passing on this. Thank you.
What's that? Hello? Oh, he goes.
I'm passing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Almost impossible for me to hear much of the discussion. Anybody wants to look at the video when you're done, your comments might be worthwhile, it'd be interesting, but it's sound's not coming through here very well for most.
Yeah, same with yours. It's not very good either. So, all right. What, I asked a question here, what does the next, the Caddis quotes, next stage of globalization look like? Where are we going from here? Is it falling apart? I mean, you're always going to have it, but it's going to be messy. It needs to be organized. I agree to that. But is it getting, where's it going? Based on the situation in the world right now with various countries and so on, where it's going. Put the pandemic thing aside, that's a temporary thing with the supply chain stuff and all that stuff. But where do you think it's going?
It might get more and more efficient. It might be better just to pay the court.
It's better than nothing. It's just a messy process. We want everything perfect, but it's a messy process.
There's always blowback and unintended consequences.
Will it matter who's in charge?
I'm sorry?
Will it matter who's in charge of the countries?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good sometimes and not so good sometimes.
Well,
depending.
you also have in so many different countries, you have different, some idiots are in charge and some good people are in charge at the same
Maybe it
time. So
depends how
it's a
it's
mix,
applied.
right? So that's why we're at where we are, I suppose. So if everybody who was in charge was perfect, maybe it would be a different situation. So does that really make that much of a difference? Unless that balance goes to some real problem, particularly
Like that guy
rich
in
countries.
China.
Yeah. Particularly the big ones, right?
Yeah.
So that,
Once
those are the ones
more
that count.
power, yeah, the bigger countries, it's
Yeah.
gonna matter.
Correct. Because they hold the most sway. All right.
You know, that movie I was in, they had Samantha Power and John Bull. Two absolutely different approaches. You know, Bull was under Bush, Samantha Power was under Obama. Totally different ideas. Samantha Power couldn't, really the humanitarian. Bull thought that was ridiculous.
Okay. So, so the U.S. still being somewhat of one of the countries of power globalization process, obviously. So there's a glitch. You're going to get, as you're just saying, we're going to get a glitch once in a while when some leadership is not where it should be, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but if it's only part of that organization, it's not necessarily going to bring the organization down. It's less. There's a tipping point where they all turn out to be idiots.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, would we see more power ceded to international organizations as opposed to individual countries? What do you think? I think that's what they mean by it.
So as opposed to the United States having 80% of the power in China, it's evenly distributed. Maybe it should be distributed based on the efficiency of that particular country, or say, working effort work.
Okay.
Because if you have inefficient countries trying to do things, they can just bring it down.
But if you have, I think, let's look at the World Trade Organization. The idea is an organ, just like the UN, it's part of all that stuff. It's the idea of you have one organization and all these countries are just team members in this organization. So is it that these international organizations, should they have more power perhaps than they do?
Well,
What do you think?
No.
yes, I don't think that there should be 5 countries that can veto and
Okay.
destroy everything that all the other countries want to. Have.
So too much power in some
Yeah.
UN Security Council, for example. Okay. All right. And this one of the questions is interesting. I think we know the answer to this one. Does globalization have a future 20 years from now? I guess the question is, what will the world look like in 20 years from now?
Probably more have to do with space than the Earth. I think there'll be,
In what way?
well, space rights, transportation to different planets.
20 years?
20 years, trust
I
me.
don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
I won't be here to find out.
Yeah, I don't really give a rat's ass.
I think around, in fact, the next year, book, there's a chapter on space.
Okay, oh, that's right. You're right.
Yeah,
You already know what's next.
yeah.
Yeah, well, it's in a book.
I
Yeah,
sent it out to everybody.
Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't see that.
It's in the.
it's in this book.
Yeah,
Yeah. in
Oh,
this
it is?
issue. Yeah, this next year. That's right.
pretty
Okay, well, let's
interesting.
leave that one for the space talk. But the, future of 20 years, again, I think we kind of discussed that already. It's going to be there. It may be messy, it may be in disarray, and it's going to pick up again, be a little bit better and so on. I mean, it's come a long way from World War II. That's, if you look at the idea of time, it's only 75 years. And we think that's a long time, but you've accomplished a lot in that period of time too, right?
Yeah, technology doubles every 6 months.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, but the elephant in the room is the environment.
Well, I think I might have mentioned before, one of our other discussion sessions I read, where there are some scientists, many scientists believe that we've got a 50-50 chance of lasting 100 years.
Oh, really?
Humans, based on
Oh my
environment,
gosh.
based on nuclear proliferation and so on. Yeah.
The
So I mean,
that means-
so anyway,
There'll be a lot of trouble with that too. The
Well-
world's gonna be on fire. A lot of these countries, South Africa, water, minerals, and stuff that other countries have.
And that won't be in 100 years.
so, I mean, a lot could change. So as you said about technology change, like, you're right, every 6 months it doubles and so on, things that are amazing, that just, like we said before, I think I'm more amazed now that we landed on the moon in 1969 than when we landed on the moon in 1969, based on what we know now, what we have. But you could, more power in here, that phone, in 30 seconds, I can get anybody on a video conference call anywhere around the world on this stuff, and that's incredible. So I guess, so it's hard to predict the future, I guess. So what you're saying, in 20 years, that's kind of irrelevant. I think it's going the same way we just talked about. What are the biggest drawbacks? We talked about some of these of globalization. We mentioned some, for example, the smaller countries, the more underdeveloped countries. What are some other ones? Yeah.
I think that globalization means that certain countries are going to have to give up their concept of hegemony.
Yeah.
That this is a team effort. It is not it's not a solo act, or even the act of 2 or 3 powers. It's got to be something that is worldwide. And so it involves the whole team coming together and making those decisions. So when you say, should we be giving up some of our power to more global entities? Yes, we should. But then we run into people like us and China who go, wait a minute, you're stepping on my toes. So
So the cooperation requires more benevolence on the part of every country.
yes, it does. It requires more, I hate to use the word sanity, but a more calm approach than
Well, a broader,
more
more
yeah,
expansive look.
a more expansive look at how the world is going to operate in the future. That it always has, the world has always been changing. It's always been getting more global. But now we're running into a whole lot of pushback. And if we're going to keep the globalization going, it's going to require for some of that pushback to become cooperation.
that kind of goes back to Gene had mentioned a little bit ago, the idea of this risk.
Yes,
And we only want to take risks that we can control.
Then it's no risk.
Exactly. So you want to, and in fact, it was expected to minimize risk, right? So that pulls back into my selfish view of I'm going to have control of this, which is the total opposite of what you're trying to achieve, which we had mentioned before, having that control and so on. That's a very basic human right. So we're going against. Of course, we also have made progress over the millennia as far as going against a lot of our hardwired thinking and so on, and socialization and things like that, right? We've made some accomplishments, but it's very tough going. So that's kind of goes back to that magic wand question. I think that's a good example of answering that question. You said, that widespread cooperation. Everybody has to buy into the idea. If we do that, we're actually, even us individually, are going to win besides everybody else. We haven't convinced everybody that.
it will be more of a win-win situation than I win, you lose.
It's gonna be awful hard for to give up power. Nobody's gonna wanna do it. If you got power, why would you give it up? I mean, control it. I mean, the other thing is, you could have these international institutions where somebody's in charge, but it's not too much. I remember when I was a kid, the United Nations is a one world government. Worst thing in the world. So.
Because very recent, that you're talking about. That's right. Okay. What are some ways governments can better combat the disadvantages of globalization? I guess you kind of answered that, really. If you're looking for combat that disadvantages, in effect, you're talking about disadvantages. It's for my country, right? The disadvantages. We have the selfish look.
Right.
So that, I think you answered that question. Which nation, in your opinion, is the quote leader of the globalization movement? Who's the leader of the globalization movement?
I don't think there is one,
Okay, why not?
because all countries are engaged in it, looking out for themselves. We're opening ties to Africa, to Latin America, to other areas of the world, simply because we need what they have. We need what they have. Minerals and so forth. And so I think there are too many chiefs in this globalization aspect. Russia wants to control its area. The United States wants to control its area. China wants to control its area and Africa. And the United States has always had a protectionist attitude towards South America from the Monroe Doctrine. So we're all looking along those lines. So I'm not sure there is a leader in globalization.
Okay.
I wonder, how would you answer that question if you asked them? Was there a leader from the course?
Were we?
I think so. I think there's been a lot of things going on. Bring it to me.
How would you measure if you were, if assuming your view is correct, there's been a lot of damage done. What damage has that been? Kind of the first person I asked. And how bad is it?
It's bad.
Okay, that's your opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else?
As long as we're engaging in these organizations, we might not agree with with how they do things, but as long as we're engaging and talking and we're exerting our influence, it's better than pulling out and letting somebody else fill with the batteries.
Not have any say.
Right.
Okay. So that's a logical answer to what Valerie was talking about. So we haven't heard, but we have been hurt by that kind of thing. TPP. And all those others. Okay. And WTO, which we're back into that. So, okay.
I appreciated what Janet said. And
So every country, even if they come across as being, well, I want to take a leadership position on this, they still have their own hidden agenda because their country. So we need somebody from outer space to come in.
That's
totally
it. That's it.
neutral.
There it is.
Right? But that's, yeah, that's covered. But that, I think that's a good point. And I think they have it, they don't know what that means, it seems. Is that what you're saying? That kind of makes sense?
Didn't the article say there's likely that it's gonna break up into regional influence?
Yes. They did mention that. You're right. The
And
reason.
that's probably gonna happen.
Can I just say, didn't we discuss some time ago, it was last year, something about, China in Africa, China in Antarctica, China's everywhere.
Uh-huh.
And so about this, regional stuff, I'm not all sure about that because China's everywhere and making a lot of impact everywhere.
It's like us.
Well, I think they have an edge. I think China has a big edge. I
What
think
is their edge?
I think they started, when we discussed before, they started early. They're, I think, making roads up there.
That by not taking the economic approach in places like Africa, we lost out. And a lot of our international influence has been humanitarian approach and military aid.
Well, we got like 800 locations throughout the world. We have this military.
Yeah.
Do you think, after World War II, the U.S. pretty much owned the world. We're basically unscathed compared to Europe and everybody else. And do you think we still have that mentality? Is that what you're saying? That we still are, the leader of the world thing?
I think
And we still haven't, we refuse to acknowledge that things have changed, as you indicated?
I think we do. I think that 9/11 was a wake-up call, and we simply went back into our shell, and
Hence the isolationism.
that's the isolationism.
Which will tend to pull back into, as you're talking about, too, which is very detrimental, because when you this size and this much power, this much wealth, You can't just hide in the corner.
And the same thing is coming up with Ukraine.
Now, let me ask you, this is totally different from this, but you mentioned the Monroe Doctrine a little bit ago. And of course, the Monroe Doctrine, which has been around for 200 years, basically we told European countries, don't mess with anything in the Western Hemisphere, particularly South America and so on. This is our domain. Isn't that what Putin's doing with Ukraine?
Yes, it is.
Well, you mentioned yesterday, it's exactly, it's us, it's cool, it's them, it's bad.
So he's doing the same. So can you blame him? Ukraine sitting right there on the side of his work. It's like Canada.
Yeah.
It's like Canada having missiles pointed at us.
Yeah, just Cuban Missile Crisis.
That's right. So you have to kind of look at both sides of it from the, not just from the perspective of a particular country, but the overall. I can't try to be as objective as that with the overall view, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I want to comment on one thing she said, I heard you, Jared, but there is some value to the humanitarian. You do have to have that people to people. And I saw that firsthand because I was actually in Africa and watching the railroad there, and there were some Chinese people there, but they don't connect with the Americans. The Chinese people, they're all different.
they're just there to do the job and do the infrastructure, but that kind of thing is what you're saying,
That's
which is helpful.
but there's no connection.
But there's no
or
humanitarian.
people.
So if you can put those two items together, then you have a pretty powerful approach, right? Is that what you're saying?
That would be good.
But then you think the people think that way. I mean, I understand what you're saying because the Chinese have never really, like black people. I mean, that's what that's my understanding. I could be wrong about that.
You're spot on.
Okay, so I understand where you're coming from, but do the Africans see do the African people really see it that way since they're making progress through them?
Yeah, they appreciate that part,
Yeah,
but in terms of on the ground and
yeah,
Connecting,
Community with
humanly
what?
connected.
that's not.
that's not happening, okay.
And that's why I'm saying there's gotta be some kind of balance there.
That was in the Africa, China chapter.
Yeah.
I think it's that.
I think that, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, why is it, and can they find a way to make it more appealing to the global, we're talking about leadership. Okay, I think we pretty much exhausted that. What, are there any other, let's go around the room for your final comments. Let's just do that. I'm gonna start with Larry Mortzoff, okay? Larry, you there? He's frozen.
Yes, I am.
There he goes. Any final comments?
Okay.
30 seconds.
I think right now when we look at this particular subject of globalization, we're very much in a short run mode of thinking, largely because of the pandemic, and also because of the increasingly belligerent comments of the three major powers, the United States, China, and Russia. That has to be unsettling, and I think that would carry into some of your trade negotiations. I think the pandemic has caused countries to think more about having onshore domestic production for items that they critically need, and perhaps to look for reliable trading partners within a particular bloc. That's my comment.
All right. Larry Orcutt, got a last final comment?
I'll pass again. Thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna go around this time. I'm gonna start with Tony and go around the other direction.
Okay.
Final comments.
Yeah, I thought the questions were over it. It was really good. With more information on it. It's important that we find ways to do it and work out some of the things that we discussed. So I think they should adopt this organization here.
We can run it.
Yeah, to write up the recommendations.
Okay.
I was just thinking about something somebody kind of said about our heads in the sand, and I think in America, so many people are living a better life than in these other countries, and they're kind of in a vacuum, but they're living a good life. They don't even want to think about.
Sure.
They don't want to be concerned about this. I think we should all be concerned. They even have a lot of countries, you know, like, well, it doesn't concern me, you know, and it does concern us. So,
So it affect them one way or another.
yeah,
But they don't know it.
unless they think we're going to live in 100 years, and we don't think that we're going to be here in 100 years.
Yeah, I mean,
Our children will.
yeah.
That's what I
Well,
want.
there you go.
That's what
Okay. I don't know.
That's what I'm concerned that in my people very, my children are doing things that I couldn't imagine doing. You know, they travel, they're entrepreneurs, their thinking is so much different than mine. You know, my son is talking about having a place to live up in Canada too, and I mean, he's thinking about, I'm going like, what? And so it's very important. Globalization is not going anywhere. It will increase because of communication. That's just the way it is. Technology has really forced the issue. And so I think we just need to keep our heads up out of that sand as a country and to be alert and to be a part of whatever we can be a part of. You know, just keep going.
Okay. Comments, final comments.
I'm sort of interested in a sub-segment of this. I'm interested in, I'd like to know more about operations of NATO, and as more and more countries have joined, and that one darn sticking point that an attack on one is an attack on all, you know, trying.
Defense. Yeah. Is NATO any kind of, I can't remember, I didn't read all the topics. NATO isn't in here, is it? No, I don't think. Like, no,
I
okay.
mean, all those little, there's a whole lot of countries in NATO now that I hadn't realized.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, you remember even when in 9/11, we had European NATO forces with their air force and so on. Or continent. Back on one, back at home.
Well, that was good, but I mean, if some little country, I have to listen here somewhere of all the NATO countries, but do we really want to do something militarily or an attack on one of the countries we don't really, well,
Okay. Right.
we don't care so much about? It's not in our national interest.
That's the key word. Okay. Ken, final thoughts.
Well, like every other topic we've talked about, there's no solution. There's no easy answers. But,
Actually, there are solutions. Nobody wants to do it.
well, that's good too.
And I'm listening to us.
Yeah, that's right.
But, you know, I'd asked earlier, who wins? And I keep going back to China because if you go into a store, if you look at the box of the package, good percentage of the time it's going to say made in China. And they make a lot of, they are trying to control the means of production in the world. They're trying to control the natural resources that go into those products. And so I think long term, we all win. If everybody's making money, as long as everybody's educated, as long as everybody's standard of living is increasing, great. But I think the ultimate winner is China because they control the means of production and resources.
We're still like that. I still amazed at the progress China has made in the last 50 years.
And I've heard, I don't know.
First, they used to be like this. Remember, they used to be the global leader.
But the world, well, they opened to the World Trade Organization let them in, and that was a big change.
Well, was that a bad thing?
I know you get a lot of people who say we empowered China because we bought all their stuff. We helped, they rose, and now counter, conflict and technology and all that. They're saying we should have stepped back and not engaged. I don't think that's right. But
Well, remember, before everything was made in China, it was made in Japan.
Well, Walmart's used to have signs hanging down, made in
I
USA.
know.
Yeah,
Walmart
use
made-
of Japan.
What?
USA, use of Japan. James, I have comments.
I'm pessimistically optimistic.
Okay, good way to be.
Really not. That will finally be able to, one day be able to stop this yo-yoing on positions on something that seems such a black and white reality. That we are a global community. If anything, the backlog at, at the harbors, everybody worrying about their Christmas shows, how interdependent we are, and we have to stop playing with it like it's a game. It's going to be hard because, China. Every time we create a vacuum, we allow them to move in, and we need to be at the table.
Well, I thought about this, I think, one question, what do you do this now? I know for certain I won't be in this room, I will not in this discussion, but I am very hopeful that there's a next group generation having the same discussion that we are having, and that they have elected much more progressive next generation of people think creatively, globally. We need that global. Because I think about the time I had cataract surgery, and my eye doctor told me go get cataract surgery, and when I go to a different doctor, I want the person at the bottom of the list because they're newer, they're smarter, and more progressive, not the guy that's running the establishment. I want to go to him.
It knows the latest stuff.
Yeah, and I told that guy, he said, thank you very much. He says, the worst thing is I get the worst schedule, And that's what those are the people we need.
There's some.
And I love senior power, but we need
Nothing terrible.
side.
That's what I have a lot of faith in younger generations. Really do.
Yeah, just send these me out.
We got wisdom.
And experience, that's what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody cares.
I thought this was a good article to end with, because if you notice through all of our discussion, we referenced almost every single other article in this issue. We brought up Brexit, we brought up supply chains, we brought up
Africa.
China. So this last article, by forcing us to look at are we going to continue globalizing, pointed out to us that all of these other articles in here were contained in that issue. And if we're going to have to deal with these issues on a global basis for a long time to come, and I certainly hope the new generation can do it.
Valerie.
I just think that the threats are right on our doorstep, and it reminds me of that film, Don't Look Up. Where, the threat's right there, and it's hollering out at you, and nobody's paying any attention, all along,
That's
and that's where we are.
That was a good, that was good. That was very good.
Yeah,
I just
we're
saw last week. Don't look up.
It's on
Netflix.
Netflix.
Netflix? Okay.
Yeah, it's very good. It's a satire.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike. the final
So,
thoughts.
the thing I always think about globalization, but you've heard the term neoliberalism, which is the Washington consensus. You gotta do it our way, you gotta have democracy, and you gotta do this, that, and the other thing, and you gotta quit spending so much money in this country. And the thing is, capitalism will sweep through the world And unless it's regulated, it's gonna be like all this inequality. And it's like trickle down. And everybody a bunch of people get rich. But she's making a good point that in other countries, that the right always makes. Through capitalism, all these countries have improved. People start making money a little bit.
You need to have a combination, is what you're saying.
Blame.
No, one final thought, Gene had mentioned, I was saying that it takes a realist to survive, but an optimist to thrive. That's kind of what you're alluding to. You know, the idea of you can never give up hope. You have to deal with what you have, but you gotta, as individuals, you gotta try to do it better. That's the thing.
Don't have optimism, but have hope. Can't be that optimistic.
Next, 2 weeks, we're gonna start with the next one, the very first one here,
2 weeks? Yeah, we could.
changing demographics. Is that the first one? Well, that should be interesting, changing demographics. Everyone has a new book, right?
Yeah.
Okay, read that, and then Tony will send it, you'll send the schedule.
Yeah, I'm putting
For the year.
together a schedule with the detail of the topic, and below the topic will be a link. I'm slowly but gradually putting the videos on the website, on YouTube. So you can click on the link and watch the video instead of us watching it like we usually do here.
That gives us more time to talk.
And then also, Larry sent us some links, and I believe
Valerie.
Val sent us too. And I'm gathering those ideas, putting them on a sheet. Then I'll share that, and we could start doing those as programs once we finish the book. I have one book left. You gonna take it?
All right, well, okay, good discussion, good talk.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.
I
Thank you.
wonder why none of our topics is on like education. That is so important, and I think ours is failing. We talk about the next generation taking over.
That's a good point. I think
I
maybe
see that as